It is the end of the year IEP crunch, and we are all feeling it. So I'm Lindsay Crane, and I head the content and community teams at Undivided. Today, we welcome back education advocate, Dr. Sarah Pelangka. I know she is feeling it too. She is the owner of No IEPs, has a doctorate in BCBA, and is the sibling of a sister with a disability. We are very grateful for her guidance and knowledge today and every day. Welcome back, Dr. Pelangka.
Hi, thank you. That was the most amazing intro ever.
And Dr. Pelangka is literally hot on the heels of like one of her many IEPs today. So we're very grateful that she is spending that time where, you know, I would probably want to be sleeping on the couch, and she's here with us. So thank you. And also with you today in the chat, we have our community manager, Donna, and one of our Undivided navigators, Iris. They're going to be passing along your questions to us. We're going to get to as many as we can. And if you still have questions after our chat, or if you want one-to-one support, our Undivided navigators would love to help. Check out the link that Donna shared in the chat about our Kickstart, and we can tell you more about how our navigators can support you exactly where you are. So since many of us are facing IEPs right now, it's a good time to review what happens if we don't agree and we can't compromise with the team. So Dr. Pelangka, what can we do?
Yeah, if you don't agree with any portion of the IEP, you know, again, California is a dual consent state, which means it requires parental consent or guardian consent. So you can always sign with exceptions, and you can agree to portions, but not all of the IEP. So you just want to make sure it's clearly documented on the signature page which portions you are not in agreement with, and then they can go ahead and move forward with the pieces that you are in agreement with. Those portions that you signed an exception would continue on as a stay put, and they would continue as the last agreed upon IEP, basically, you know, that was instated.
And to ask you a question that is impossible to answer for everyone, what are the chances of wrapping up these IEPs before school ends?
Do you mean, by wrapping up, do you mean coming to full agreement, or?
Well, sure. Like, you know, I mean, there's many steps in due process. Obviously, if you're going all the way, that's not going to happen before the end of school. But if parents are feeling discouraged because maybe there's some things that they couldn't agree upon in that IEP, you know, there are options. So I don't know, you know, there's might be some parents new to this process. So if you sort of just want to touch on, like, is there hope that maybe there maybe could be some agreement, you know, depending obviously before the end of school?
Yeah. So I guess a couple things. I think, first of all, it depends on what type of IEP meeting you're having. Of course, like transition meetings are a little harder because your child's moving to a whole different schedule for the day potentially, right? And certain things are going to change no matter what, like minutes. If they're moving from elementary to middle school, just that's going to be a natural change. So of course you want to try to get those pieces hashed out if you can. Definitely demand having that transition meeting prior to the end of the year and really clearing those pieces up. The portions that aren't able to be, you know, come to agreement, that doesn't automatically imply due process by any means. Like the next natural step would be to continue to meet with the team, you know, again, maybe even a couple of times and try to come to an agreement as a team. You know, there's dispute resolution, there can be mediation. So there's definitely things that can occur prior to due process. And, you know, it just, at the end of the year, everybody's calendars are so full, you know, the district side, my side, if you have an advocate, you know, we're all very busy. So I think you just have to kind of weigh the options as far as, are you willing to meet? If you really feel like you have to, you know, close the meeting before the end of the year, are you willing to excuse any members of the team? Is that okay for the purposes of your child's meeting? You know, if not, and you require a full team, which is generally, you know, recommended, just being willing to wait until the fall and reconvening, picking back up where you left off, knowing that, you know, there's also no guarantee that the same team members are going to come back, right? So the district can, of course, guarantee a service, but they can't guarantee personnel. So if your hope is to have the same people, that's never a guarantee. So it may be the case that when you reconvene, it's someone who's completely unfamiliar to your child. Sorry, my husband is here. This time it's not a pet, it's a human. yeah, so those are always, variables that aren't necessarily in your control, but there's options. And then we'll get into assessments, I'm sure, later.
Yeah. And I also see that we do have, we have a couple IP meetings yesterday, couple next week. We have Candace has hers Monday. So people are definitely, definitely in the hot zone. So we're glad you're here. Again, throw any questions you have in the chat as we go, because we know a lot of things are going to come up. Can anything and again, for maybe some newer parents, if you don't close out that IEP and get everything signed and sorted, can anything happen or move forward in the summer?
So again, I think that it's important for parents to be aware that you can agree to parts of an IEP. So particularly for transitions, like I had one yesterday where I think I shared with you, Lindsay, like the entire document is a hot mess, but we at least need to get SAI minutes and service minutes, corrected on the record of change page to match the high school day. So if we can get that done so the student can start, on the first day of school, and then we're going to have to take our time and deal with the rest of it, as soon as possible come fall. So definitely know that you can sign with exceptions, and the whole IEP doesn't have to be perfect in order for you to sign it. Like then you're just delaying implementation of other pieces that your child could have access to. First, before summer, I think the biggest piece, of course, would be ESY, extended school year. If your child does qualify for extended school year, or if you believe that your child should qualify for extended school year and that's not already part of the offer of FAPE, then that's obviously something you want to make sure you cover and you review as an IEP team before you go into summer, because extended school year happens in the summer. So you have to address that. You can't wait until the fall. Definitely be mindful of that piece, and again, demand that, if that's something that hasn't been addressed yet, your team meets as soon as possible. And another thing is, oftentimes throughout the year, I'm sure parents that are on here have heard their team say, oh, we don't have to talk about ESY yet. We can talk about that at the end of the year. And that's definitely not the case for this reason. There has to be enough time for you to be able to appeal that, essentially, if they are denying it. If they're waiting till the end of the year and they say, sorry, we're not going to offer it, and then it's the end of the year, you're stuck like a rock in a hard place. So they're supposed to review those things much earlier on than like right now for that reason. So make sure that you're mindful of that. And if you hear that as a parent, you say, no, we can talk about that now. We can go off of data from, of course, unless your child's in preschool and they've never been in school, I get that. And really ESY isn't a thing in preschool anyway, but school age, there should be plenty of data from the past to reflect whether or not it would be beneficial, right?
Right, absolutely. And actually, for a preschool question, Iris was asking a question for another parent. She said, can you use stay put when transitioning from preschool gen ed to kinder?
So that's kind of what I'm referring to as far as transitions. I think for any transition, irregardless of what it is, preschool to kinder, elementary to middle school to high school, there's a records of change page because things don't directly transfer over. There's differences in schedule, so there's going to be differences in minutes, and those things have to be hashed out. Of course, if there's like complete disagreement for bigger reasons, like you're feeling like you want, let's say, all gen ed and they're only offering special day class, that's different. But if we're talking about, going from an elementary school resource pullout model to what that would look like in middle school, I don't really think you have to do a stay put. You just have to get that piece hashed out and agree with that exception. So like obviously preschool minutes are going to look a lot different come kinder because it's a longer day. So you can definitely address that. And again, if there's other pieces of the IEP that there's disagreement, like sign with those exceptions, but the stay put for the purposes of the minutes wouldn't really work out because it's a longer day. Like they wouldn't be able to match. You know what I'm saying? It wouldn't make sense.
Jennifer said, could be, right? We've been fighting for the school to help our son with homework. They say they don't offer homework help. And the response was that he no longer is required to do homework. So they just eliminated it. Required to do home. So I don't know if that meant homework. So they eliminated it. What can I do? The amount of homework he gets will keep getting more each year. Now he'll be going into 5th grade next year and he doesn't have the skills to do his homework independently at home.
I definitely do see that though in IEPs where parents will kind of say homework is a nightmare. You know, my child comes home and it takes us 3 hours. Like they're just so tapped out. Of course, when kids get home, it's like they've been holding it together all day and they get home and it's just really hard. And the schools are like, well, he's great here. I don't know what the problem is. And it's like, yeah, it's a completely different setting. And I mean, even my own son, you know, he comes home, he's not on an IEP at all. And it's difficult for him because he just wants to do his thing. So I think to an extent it's pretty typical, and schools have to be more kind of cognizant of that. And it's even more challenging for kids who are on IEPs and who are holding it together all day, and they come home and we're like, okay, now do this homework in addition to everything you did all day for the past 6 hours. So, I mean, there's a number of accommodations can be put in place, right? Like for elementary school, they don't have directed studies yet, but that is something that's available in middle school, which is really helpful for students who struggle with homework, where that can be their elective period and then they do their homework in that period so they don't have to bring it home. You know, not necessarily completely removing homework altogether, but maybe doing less of it, ensuring that they're showing mastery of the standards at least. I mean, it just depends on the reason, right? But there's definitely things that can be done that wouldn't just be, well, he just doesn't have to do homework.
Right. Yeah, we faced some of that as well. So I think that's a common thing where it might be fine that year, but then it's going to change to the next year and you don't know really how to balance it. Mm-hmm. And I know that you've touched on transitions, you know, several times, and we did have a question sent ahead of time from Ophelia, and she asked, what if we can't agree on goals and my child is starting a new school next year? I mean, those goals might be totally different, the minutes, like you said. So how does that work?
Yeah, so that's definitely a situation in which I would make sure, I mean, services are based on goals. So I get it. Like if you don't have set goals, then how do you derive the minutes? I would say if you can at least agree upon the areas in which goals are needed, and you have an idea of how many goals may be written, and maybe you're just not agreeing on the way the goals are written, at least kind of getting a feel for what the recommended minutes would be and trying to get that settled out and hash out the schedule. That's really the biggest piece. I don't know what grade this student is, but particularly for middle school and high school, like you really want to try to have the schedule set, because it's hard. If you change one period, it may change the whole day. So that's really the challenging part. If it's elementary school, it's a lot more flexible. It's not necessarily as big of a deal. If you can't agree on like goal areas, then that's obviously a bigger issue, because that could completely impact services altogether. And that would then lead to maybe a disagreement in what classes the student should be in. So you can also request to meet over the summer. I know district staff work over the summer. It just may not be a full team, right? And so you can try to at least hash it out through an administrative amendment if need be, or of course, just try to hold the IEP meeting as soon as possible. That would be a situation where maybe you request to meet those few days before the first day of school with the new team or the team when they come back. So again, there's options. You just have to work with the team to kind of figure out how to move forward.
Right, which I think that's a perfect transition to what I was going to ask about, because beyond the major issue of agreeing on what our kids need, once we arrive there, then we need to ensure that our children's teams communicate and collaborate with one another. And that doesn't always happen organically. So there's, scheduling, huge caseloads, lack of planning times that can make it very, obviously difficult. But for our kids to thrive, it's really necessary for their team members to talk and compare notes about what's working or what isn't. And so maybe just as you've found that sweet spot, right, your child's going to move to the next class or the next school and you're starting all over again. So is it ever possible for existing teams to meet with next year's team? And if not, like what can parents do to facilitate some sort of passing the torch beyond just handing over this really wordy IEP?
Yeah, I think it's definitely recommended that this year's team meets with next year's team. Absolutely. For transition meetings, that should be what's happening in the transition meeting. That's the whole point, is for the current providers to pass the torch, as you said, to the new providers. If it's not a transition meeting and it's just, maybe the K through 3 class and now he's moving to the 4th, 5th class and it's the same school, of course, that would actually be even easier. Or even switching schools, same district. That's like best practice. That should be happening. If it's not happening, then that's kind of shocking. And absolutely, as a parent, just request it. And you can even request to be a part of that meeting. It doesn't have to be a full IEP meeting, right? It could just be something a little bit less formal if you're just wanting to make sure that they at least talk to one another and familiarize the new team with your child. If you want it to be very formal and you want things documented, of course, then you would call a full IEP, which might be a little harder to fit in, but I definitely recommend having that happen.
Well, I know the common thing that parents hear is, and if your child is in gen ed classes, let's say like with secondary, so you have all these different teachers, but I even heard this in elementary too. Like we don't make our schedule until right before. So we don't know where kids are going to be because they could change. Kids move in and out of the district. So we don't know numbers. So there's no way for teams to meet before the end of the year because we really don't know like who your child's going to be with yet. So then it just doesn't happen. And so, but maybe the beginning of the next year, is that if it isn't possible, is it something that we can ask for, have that written in our IEPs now for next year? I mean, I know you mentioned kind of an IEP check-in, but that's not really teams kind of talking and sharing info.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. If you're talking about students who are more mainstreamed in gen ed, you're right. They'll generally say, we don't know yet. We don't know which teacher. And again, teachers can leave at any time. So even if you have the meeting before the end of the year, it doesn't mean you don't know what can happen. So yeah, you can always write that into the IEP. You can even have it on the accommodations page. So it's always there for the next year and the next year, like do, a formal meeting or an informal meeting to familiarize new teachers prior to the first day of school or within the first week of school. Like that's not really that big of a deal. But I think, again, just being mindful of teachers' time too. Like if you're expecting this super long meeting and everyone's out there requesting it, just be mindful that they're also setting up for the new year and they have a lot on their plate. So having realistic expectations while requesting it, I definitely think is a great thing. And then another good point, if they're going to have multiple teachers, it's not required to have every teacher in the IEP meeting. So you're right, they're not necessarily going to have a chance to meet every single teacher, but the case manager would be the primary, person to ensure that the new case manager is meeting the old case manager and they're having that conversation. And then the new case manager is overseeing all these other teachers. So, just having that trust and confidence in that person, if you're feeling like certain teachers, because it's going to happen. It happens for any student, gen ed or special ed. Not every teacher gets your kid. Not every teacher is a fit with your kid. And that's just reality. So you may have to be in direct contact with certain teachers throughout the year. And that's just, going to happen. Another really strong recommendation I often give to parents is to just do like an intro letter about your child and just send it to every teacher, because you aren't necessarily going to have time to meet all 6 or 7 teachers every year, but at least introducing yourself, briefly introducing your child and letting them know if they ever need anything, and like, these are what my kids' strengths are, and I just want you to know. I think that's really positive as well.
Absolutely. And when I was asking this question to our team, getting ready for my IEP also, because it's our first it's our 6th to 7th grade. So it's kind of the first, not the transition, but really like, hey, what's this middle school IEP going to be? And Lisa Carey, who's an Undivided advocate navigator, she said she will go and ask, like if there's one teacher elementary, but for like 1 to 3 tips, like what worked working with your child. You can go to your teachers yourself outside of the IEP if they're not going to be there and say like, what worked, or what do you want like my child's teachers next year to know? And then somehow include that, with your IEP at a glance or your letters that you just talked about, like for the next year. I know last year, my daughter's ESY teacher, virtual, but happened to be, then she was her case carrier. She wrote, I didn't even ask. She wrote like a 1-page letter about what worked and what didn't with my daughter. And I heard from teachers, I gave that to them with that IEP at a glance, and they were so grateful to have it. Because it wasn't just me saying, hey, this is what she needs. It was another teacher. And they also knew exactly like who they could go to with questions. So it might be something for people to think about.
Yeah, I love that. And I think to kind of piggyback on that and take it one step further, I just had an IEP a few weeks ago, and the case manager actually took videos and showed them in the IEP meeting of those types of things, like things that the student does well, or certain goals that she met and showing like videos of her doing it, and then, implementation of certain accommodations. There were so many, I mean, short clips, of course, it didn't take up like too much time, but to me, that's so much. I mean, of course, the picture, speaks 1,000 words, right? So seeing the video and having a new kind of receiving teacher be able to see that, I think is really, really helpful. I was like, I wish every IUP team did this.
I was going to say, like, where's that case carrier? She's amazing.
It was probably one of the best IUPs I've been in as far as seeing how they ran it. And it helped me as an advocate. I mean, that's another way to really help the next team.
Right. That's amazing. So I guess if your case carrier isn't, it's a way to introduce your child as the parent, right? That's awesome. I also see this is, Andrea has a question that I think is just really important because a lot of, IEPs coming up, parents don't know how to do this. She just said, can a social emotional goal such as helping a student joining a social club be an IEP goal? And if so, where should that be included on the IEP?
Yeah, absolutely. We have this goal pretty frequently for like middle school and high schoolers. That's when clubs, campus clubs are a thing. Not so much in elementary school. That's more like playing on the playground type goals, adult facilitated play or turn taking or what have you, cooperative arrangements. But joining clubs can definitely be a goal, and it's measurable by, writing the goal in such a way that the student would attend the club at least once daily. Usually clubs are once or twice a week. I'm sorry, not once daily, once weekly. And of course, that's something that's measurable, or you can word it, that they'll attend and engage in a certain amount of, conversation exchanges with a peer or whatever the need is for that student. Of course, making it measurable. You can also write it that the student will create their own club and have that be a thing, because that's definitely something that campuses are open and welcome to, and it will likely be more successful if it's something that the student has a strength in and that they're kind of an expert in, and they can, it's not, we call it like dual acquisition. So if socializing is something that they're working on, and then we're also pushing them into a club that isn't necessarily something they're super into, then they're working on that too. So if like the kid's into Minecraft or certain board games or whatever, then that will be more of like a maintenance in their repertoire, and they can show their strengths, and then they're really focusing on the social piece. So starting a club, teachers are super open to it. I've seen admin be super open to it. I'm actually working and kind of consulting with our local middle school on ideas for next year here, because middle school, I found is the hardest for the social component. It's so hard. And so, yeah, I think that's a great goal. It would go in, you want to make sure it's on the social emotional present levels page, that there's, concerns in that area, and that's something that you want to look into. And then again, it can be a goal, or it can just be something that the team is willing to support the student in kind of navigating, and you can follow up and check in. It would be a social emotional goal, and you would just go from there.
That's great. And yeah, I would love to know, like, if people's kids have started clubs. I would love to know what your kids have started. Yeah, throw it in the chat. And I know you've talked about ESY a couple times, but I would love for you to point out what maybe some people don't realize, that because I know I saw some questions come in before about ESY isn't inclusive, so it's not really a placement I want my child, but it doesn't mean you have to write off all of ESY, right? Like, what do we need to know about that?
Yeah, so ESY is interesting. So there's, extended school year is what ESY stands for, and that is a special education service. So it's completely, in terms of the SAI component, it would be comprised of students that are on IEPs only. So I actually had an IEP this morning where this came up. The student is primarily in gen ed and only has resource pullout, and it was kind of a discussion amongst the team as far as would it be appropriate or too restrictive. So there's still summer school. There's still the general education option for the academic component that students would have access to. Like, like you mentioned earlier, if a student is primarily in gen ed and they only have resource pullout, for example, ESY probably wouldn't be the most appropriate as far as the specialized academic instruction component, but they can still attend summer school just like any other gen ed student would, and they would still potentially, or they still could have access to their other services. So And that can be the case for any student. So parents have the option to send their child to ESY. Just because it's offered doesn't mean you have to take advantage of it. It's not required. And you can take advantage of portions of it. So let's say, they qualify for speech language therapy and occupational therapy, and their SAI minutes, but you're only wanting the speech and the OT and not the SAI piece, then you can do that. You can take advantage of that. And you can have your child attend gen ed summer school and also still have access to their speech and OT. So that is something for parents to be aware of, that just because they don't get ESY doesn't mean they can't still tap into summer school. And then another thing that I think most parents aren't aware of, again, came up this morning, is if your child receives ERMs or ERCs, or I think you call it ERICs in your district, the social emotional support services, that is all year long. So there is no interruption. And that's including winter break, spring break, Thanksgiving break, summer break. There shouldn't be any interruption. So you want to make sure that if your child receives like that intensive individualized counseling service, that you're aware, irregardless of whether they qualify for ESY or not, they're continuing to have access to that support all year round.
And I'll ask this question just for clarification. Evie said, can we request to receive the ESY services but not take the child to the self-contained class? So it sounds like, Evie, that maybe that would just be the summer school option if that was an option. Is that right, Dr. Pelangka? Or that can't be, you can't exchange it for tutoring or anything like that?
No. And again, you can't just request ESY either. I don't want to get misconstrued on that piece. It's not like every student who has an IEP qualifies for ESY. There's obviously parameters, but if your child does qualify for ESY and the IEP team agrees, or if you have a child who is not in a self-contained class, let's say they're primarily a gen ed, they're considered a gen ed student essentially, but they have other services, you can still have the discussion of whether or not they qualify for those services for ESY. And as any other student would, they would also have the right to attend summer school options. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Another big question that we get about summer are devices or assistive technology, any kind of equipment, whether that's, standers or iPads, Chromebooks, AAC devices, FM systems for hearing aids. Can we take those home for the summer?
Yeah, so any ATAC or assistive technology devices, the law now states as of recent that any and all devices can be taken home if it is decided by the IEP team that the student requires those assistive technological devices in order to benefit, and access FAPE. So I think the most kind of common example, or the one that's most often, that I see in my clients would be like AAC devices, so communication devices. And of course, the argument is, well, how can a student make progress and be a fluent communicator if they're only communicating or they only have a voice while they're at school? We can't take their voice away. So that's kind of like a no-brainer. I will say it's often times presented to families that during the trial period, they're not allowed to take it home. That's definitely not true. In order for them to, again, prove that it's something that would benefit them, they should have access to it all day. So don't fall for that argument. Other things, of course, it would be a discussion, an IEP team discussion, but if an argument can be made that the student needs access to it all day in order to access FAPE, then yes, the law says that they have to have access to it and they can take it home. And of course, parents would then be asked to sign a waiver, right? Like if it gets broken or whatnot, that's pretty standard. But students can have the right to access their assistive technology equipment at home if, again, it can be proven that they need that in order to access FAPE.
And then, but some of those might be limited to when they're attending ESY. And so for that month between ESY and school, there's a chance that maybe you have to turn that equipment in at the end of ESY and you won't have it.
Right. And I think, for that kind of gap where there is no instruction, if you will, again, I as a parent, I would just make the argument if not having access to it would cause regression, maybe it wouldn't be the best idea to remove it. Like, of course, having a voice, you can't just remove a voice and say, okay, we'll give it back to you when school starts. So I think arguments can definitely be made. I know you brought up the Chromebook, and like the example I would, try to push is, I know that school isn't required, but if my child doesn't continue to have frequent repetition and access, then he or she may regress. So we want to ensure that my child can continue to practice for this month. There's always things like that you can say as a parent to, I guess, sway the district into understanding why it's a continued need. But you do have to prove, that they need it in order to access FAPE. That's the way that the law is written.
Right. And this was a good question too. Iris is saying they asked about apps. So would the same go for apps, sort of the apps they're using in school, and having access to keep working on those and sort of continuing so there's not regression?
Yeah, I think you would have to kind of use the same argument in order to prove that it's a requirement in order to access FAPE. That's really the piece that the district is looking at, right? Of course, any and all students could benefit from having access to things all year round, right? But at the end of the day, that's not what gen ed students are required to do. So, it's not to say that every parent will get access to all things all year round, but if you can prove that it's a necessity for your child to access FAPE, then it's definitely worth requesting.
And if you don't already have this written into the IEP, do you need to call and have like an IEP addendum, something for this assistive technology to make sure that it comes home with you? If that isn't already in your IEP, do you need to call another meeting, have that written in before school? Or maybe that's administrative amendment that you mentioned too, where you don't have to have the whole team together if there's no disagreement.
I think you're asking like before summer, if this isn't something that parents already have access to, what do they need to do? I mean, yes. Absolutely. If there's any concern or thought that your child's device is going to be taken away for whatever reason, you can definitely put it in writing and see what the district's response is, if they're going to require an IEP meeting in order to continue to for your child to continue to have access over summer. I mean, certain things aren't like, so I think it depends on what the device is, but it never hurts to ask, and then you would just kind of go from there.
I guess to try to recap kind of what we've talked about is, let's wrap up the IEPs the best you can, right? Squeeze in that tour if your child is going to a new school or class. Take pictures, talk about it over the summer, gather some teacher tips that you can share with the new team, maybe even with the ESY teacher, grab some wine, grab some friends. We've almost made it. And if you do want to have a partner with that wine, not necessarily with the wine, but with the summer, our Undivided navigators are ready to start your first boost call. We know this is difficult. And so whether you want to know how Regional Center can help support your child's summer, or if you just want to find an accessible karate camp, our navigators can help steer you in the right direction and get you through and start getting you even prepared for next year when you're ready for that. And the best part is that you don't have to figure it out alone. So to find out more information about how you can receive this personalized support and meet your navigator, check out our Kickstart. Donna's going to put the link in the chat. Our mission is to support you so your children can thrive, and we want you to thrive too. So if you're not already a member of our Facebook group, join us. This week, we're talking about IHSS, swimming and sports classes. Thank you again to Dr. Pelangka for today's wisdom. And like I said, for this entire year, we always learn and grow after talking to you. And I know you're not going to be sleeping for a few more weeks of back-to-back IEPs, but please share a picture of yourself enjoying wine after your month-long IEP frenzy has settled. Thank you to Donna. Oh, look at that. It's wine time. You are right, Donna, or Lexi, whoever put that up. And thanks to Donna and Iris in the chat, and especially to all of you for stopping by Undivided Live. Wishing everyone collaborative, strength-based IEPs where your child is respected and supported. And if they aren't, hopefully throughout this year, we've given you some ideas to get that IEP and maybe your IEP team into shape. Either way, you've got this. So even if it feels like you don't, you do. So have a beautiful weekend, and we will see you next week. Bye.